Hello, hello. This one's public. Soto smash. Juan Soto crushes his first career leadoff home run for the New York Mets. I haven't watched too many Met games this year. One of the reasons being it's not because they suck. My expectations were that they weren't going to be too good this year. They won 83 games last year, and they lost some key bats. And some of the additions that they made were welcome, but I felt they were welcome, with the addition of some of the core that they let go. Um, I have watched Mets teams when they suck. There, I've been seeing some things in my feed from like past years. Um, it's like on this date in Mets history, they might have had a home run from 2013. They had a Darrell Hamilton, home run, and I used to watch the games on Fox Sports New York, where Gary Thorne and Fran Healy would call the game. I would watch, 162 Met games per year. I couldn't wait for 7 o'clock to roll around. I would watch the game, and then after watching the game, I would go over to ESPN and watch Baseball Tonight to see highlights of the games I just watched. And of course, this includes, I want to say I really got into the Mets around sports in general, late 90s. So my father used to take me to Mets games in 1993, and I remember we went to a game, and he pointed out Barry Bonds, and he says, "You look out for him. He's good." And I guess my grandfather did the same thing to my father, where he pointed out Mickey Mantle. Now I don't really recall if Barry Bonds was on the Pirates or the Giants at that time, but I've always kept some tabs on Barry Bonds. I remember his first All-Star Game home run. I was rooting for him in 2002 for the World Series. Wasn't really rooting for him to break the single season home run record, but the all-time record. The single season thing, like '98, was one of the greatest seasons ever, and it's like the Triple Crown. Like I guess American Pharaoh was the first Triple Crown winner in like 30 years, and there was all that anticipation. And then once it happened, like, if somebody did it again, it wouldn't be as exciting. I think someone did do it, right, a couple years after, um, and it wasn't as big of a deal. Um, so it just seemed too soon. There wasn't, any type of rivalry. I remember, like, prior to the season, they were talking about Griffey going for it, and then, McGuire, had this pace where like 36 home runs by the All Star break, and then Sports Illustrated came out with this cover where they said, "Watch out, McGuire! Here comes Slammin' Sammy," and Sosa entered the race, and I was glued to the to Newsday that had the home run totals for Griffey, Sosa, and McGuire. So there was maybe just a little bit more to it, but anyway. I wasn't really fully aware of the Mets team in '93. I have a calendar, or used to have a calendar of the Mets in '96. I, I would never been able to tell you that Willie Randolph was a Met. He was a manager for the Mets in, '06 and '07. Um, I forget if he was, I guess he took over in '05 or something. But I don't, I didn't realize he actually played for the team in the mid '90s. Jeff Kent was on that team, and like, Bernard Gilkey for some reason sticks out, and Todd Hundley, of course. I like catchers. Todd Hundley set the record for home runs by catcher for the Mets. 41 might have been in the league in general, and that record has since fallen. And but it wasn't really until the Mets traded for Piazza that I became really invested in the Mets. It was my favorite player coming to my favorite team, and I started going to more games. I started going to games with friends. I remember going to a game where Piazza came over and he hit like a go-ahead double, and I was with my friend Chris and Neil, and my friend Chris was mentioning how John Franco had blown a save, and the Mets were in the playoff race with the Cubs and whatnot. So this is when my memories of baseball really started taking shape. I watched a little bit of the '96 World Series. I remember a little bit of the '95 with the Indians and the Braves and Charles Nagy and stuff, and the Yankees and Braves the following year, where the Braves had a 2-0 lead. The Yankees come back and win 4-2, and there was all that stuff about Joe Torre's brother. I think this was a little later, where Joe Torre's brother had open heart surgery and whatnot. That was probably in the later '90s. But I don't recall the '97 World Series um, between the Marlins and I guess the Indians. But I did see a clip of it later on, and I knew that Bob Costas called the game. I guess it was the NBC, last time NBC had it, the World Series before Fox started taking over, and Joe Buck and Tim McCarver became the voices of the World Series. Um, I saw Joe Buck call game, I guess, on ESPN this year. I think that is the point of me giving this backstory of my baseball watching history, is that I currently have YouTube TV, and they don't have SNY or Yes. So other streaming services that I've had in the past, PlayStation Television, they had SNY. Hulu's had SNY. DirecTV and DirecTV Stream have had SNY. YouTube TV doesn't. And the other thing Hulu had that really, they had ESPN Plus. So it looks like there's a little thing of the Oakland Athletics down here. They were more out-of-market games, so I watched some Oakland Athletic games and Houston Astro games and whatnot. And that's when I had Hulu. I've seen some. I was watching the Dodgers and the Cardinals the other day. It was a close game, I guess. Cardinals maybe were up like 3-0. Then the Dodgers, made it close. Scored a couple of runs in the top half of the ninth. Um, but okay, so '98 the Mets almost made the playoffs. '99 they had the best defensive infield ever, or something, or one of them, and that's with Ordonez and Allroot and Ventura and Alfonso. I believe they won 97 games that year. They won the wild card. The Braves continued their perennial division title streak, and the next year they also won the wild card. Um, but they made it to the World Series, and they didn't have as many wins. And 2001, they didn't make the playoffs. They were, coming off back-to-back playoff seasons. They were kind of considered a playoff contender. There was the 9/11 season. My friend Neil, he mentioned like how he regrets. We went to some dance at Our Lady of Mercy or something, and we missed Piazza's 9/11 home run. I hate that home run. It's one of these things like, oh, it brought a city together back, terrorists, really, dampen America. And this is before I had like anti-American attitudes after being assaulted by the police and put into a coma and falsely imprisoned, and like I have disdain for America because of how I've been treated. This was just, I love baseball, and this moment took away, I think, from other things, particularly in the 2000 season. Like, if Piazza doesn't have that 9/11 home run, the home run I'm probably going to remember him for is the June 2000 Mets versus Braves. The Mets are down by like 8 runs or something, and they're down, and they score. They scored like 9 runs in the bottom of the 8th, and Piazza caps it off with a 3-run home run to take the lead. And I don't regret, social interaction for having missed a baseball game that didn't really amount to anything. Didn't get them to the playoffs, didn't win them anything. It was just, tear-jerking home run after 9/11. You know, the Yankees didn't even win the World Series that year. You know, Arizona won, and you know, um, but anyway, the Mets would eventually get Mo Vaughn. I don't know if it was in the '02 season, it might have been '03. Mo Vaughn was kind of like I don't want to say a meme player, but like the Yankees had a history of just spending where they were giving these bloated contracts to players and they could just grab anybody. And it's weird because like their core of, you know, Posada and Jeter and Pettit and who else was they? Like, you know, they had a lot of homegrown talent, but they had the ability. They would get the Carl Pavanos, they would get the Kevin Browns, they would get the, you know, Roger Clemens, these big free agent guys, and they could just spend all this money. And like the Mets kind of wanted to compete, and they had Steve Phillips, and but they got like the Mets plan was getting these old players who were like way past their prime and overpaying them. And Mo Vaughn came in, and he's one of the last players to wear 42, and he had, you know, success in Boston and Anaheim and whatnot. And he comes in and he's this big guy, and he hits this, you know, he's known for hitting this long home run, um, where he hit the Budweiser sign at Shea Stadium, which is like a 500-foot home run. Maybe only one other player, Mark McGuire, did it, and I guess it's remarkable for McGuire because that would have been an opposite field home run. But he never really amounted to too much, but you know, it's certainly an era where I watched the Mets. You know, the Mets weren't really in playoff contention, but I still watched the Mets religiously, and 2004, I think they got Art Howe. They bought into, you know, they got, you know, the Oakland Athletics had this team that went to playoffs for a few years, but they had like all these MVP type guys. They had Tejada and Giambi, and they had Mark Mulder and Barry Zito and Tim Hudson, three Cy Young candidates. They had Eric Chavez and whatnot. And the Mets get Art Howe. It was kind of, you know, just kind of like a lackluster season. Didn't really. Um, but then in '05, they got Carlos Beltran after his playoff run with the Astros in 2004. Came over from the Kansas City Royals. There was a trivia question. What Yankees player has played for both the Yankees and Royals? And I forget who the guy said. Might have been Knobloch, and I would have never guessed Knobloch. I knew Knobloch came from the Twins, but I guess Knobloch's last season he played for the Royals. The other answer would have been Carlos Beltran. And but Carlos came over, and he immediately made an impression of bunting for base hits when he had 40 home run potential. And I guess that was kind of, you know, like we gave you all this money and you're bunting for singles. And the other thing about that season is the Mets went after Carlos Delgado, and Delgado chose the Marlins over the Mets. And the Mets had homegrown talent coming up. They had David Wright and Jose Reyes. And you know, '05 was, I guess, a mediocre season, but then in '06, they get Delgado and they make a playoff run. It was one of the best teams I ever saw, and that has been kind of ruined by runs, runs per game. So I guess the Phillies actually had a better offense than the Mets. Um, the Mets had like 6 All-Stars that year. They had Jose Reyes, they had Beltran, they had Paul LaDuca, they had Carlos Delgado, um, Jose Reyes, David Wright, and I don't know if I mentioned all 6. They also had Moises Alou that season, Cliff Floyd, and they won 97 games. They had the best record in baseball, and They had a midseason injury where DeJuan Sanchez was hit. He was clipped getting out of a taxi or something, so they traded Xavier Nady to, I guess, get Oliver Perez. They also, I think, traded for John Maine, and they they lost in the playoffs to an 83 win Cardinals team that I guess they had some hot pitching with Jeff Suppan and one of the Weavers, Jared Weaver, and Chris Carpenter, and they also had benefit of like Chris Carpenter was kind of like the only ace of the staff of the Cardinals, and they had the benefit of rain where it gave Carpenter some extra rest. Now, I don't think Carpenter was actually that much of a factor in the series, um, but I think he was slated to pitch game one. I had tickets for this game. They got rained out. They wound up playing game two, and game two was a game that they had the lead, and then Delgado, muffed a ground ball or something, and I wound up getting a T-shirt that says "fucking Delgado." You know, they blew the lead, and then they started playing the final countdown, and some guy behind me and my father at the game had a seizure, and it was just kind of like that was kind of like the aura, and the Mets wound up losing that series on an infamous Carlos Beltran down looking. Um, I don't really, it was kind of a heartbreak, but I don't hold him accountable. The way the game was managed. Aaron Heilman came in because, Willie Randolph didn't trust Billy Wagner, who had a rough series. Aaron Heilman gives up this home run to Yadier Molina, and the Mets had to rally to get the bases loaded to put Beltran in a position to hit a go-ahead, and like Beltran had an MVP type season, so I like to say there's that line from Major League where the manager pulls out the pitcher, and he says, "You're one of the reasons we're here," So that's the next season, though. The next season, 2007, the Mets collapsed in September. They had like an 8-game lead in the final month, and then they play the Marlins, the final game of the season. Tom Glavine's pitching. They lose. They don't go to the playoffs. The next year, the same narrative basically happens, but this time we'll put the blame solely on Daniel Murphy. Daniel Murphy, Johan Santana pitched the first game of the season, and they're playing in Miami, and he makes an outfield error. I don't know if it went down as an error, but it was misplayed ball. They lose the game, and that one game makes the difference because again, they play probably the same situation where Glavine's pitching against the Marlins, final game of the season, and they lose. And I like to say, well, Glavine's clearly still an Atlanta Brave. He's a double agent. He hates the Mets. He wants the Mets to lose, so he's going to throw this game. 2009, they opened Citi Field. I have season tickets. I had season tickets in 2008 as well. And it's just cold. It was one of the coldest, like, every single game I went to, even like in June and July and August, it's like 40 degrees at the stadium, and it's just like a wind turbine for garbage. There's garbage everywhere flying around Citi Field, and so David Wright has this Gazoo helmet on. I don't know if that was '09, but anyway, I would continue to watch the Mets. We didn't get season tickets after that because Citi Field really didn't offer anything to season ticket holders. So we had low seats at Shea Stadium, which were basically just as good as field level. And the amenities, you had access to the Diamond Club. They might have included parking. And you had box seats, and it could be considered like an heirloom. where you might want to pass on your box seats to your children or whatnot. At City Field, we wound up getting the promenade, which was basically equivalent to the mezzanine at Shea Stadium, and all the amenities were basically open to anybody. And it's not like that exclusivity made it might have been a sweetener on the deal, but like you could just buy your tickets off StubHub. For the amount of games that my father went to, buying tickets from StubHub was better. Um, I think when I had season tickets, like when I started driving, my friend Chris and I would go to games on a whim. Like it's like 4:30, and we text each other, "Hey, you want to go to a Met game?" I go to his house around a quarter after 5, and we would drive to Shea Stadium to catch the 7 o'clock game. So we were going to a lot of games, and I think my father, saw that and he said, "You know what? Why don't I get you season tickets so you can go to all the games?" And like at that point, I guess my friend Chris and I weren't going to as many games together. And so for like my father and I, he could only really make it on weekends, so Saturday and Sunday. And so the combination of, worse seats for the same price and like the amenities where like there wasn't really any advantage to having season tickets. You could always just buy games, a la carte. Games weren't really sold out. Like some of the appeal of buying, season tickets at Shea Stadium was the Subway Series. Those games were typically sold out, and you would pay a premium to buy them on the market. But at City Field, if we want to go to a game, hey, there's a game on Tuesday. Like the likelihood of that game being sold out is not very likely. And so we no longer got season tickets. We didn't even get plan tickets. We had plan tickets, for several years, probably starting around like 02, 03 or something, maybe a little later, where we got like all the Saturday games and whatnot, because that's all my father could really go to. And but I would watch the teams, in the 2010, 2011, 2013, 2014 season. I was, actively watching the draft when they drafted Nimmo, when they drafted Matt Harvey ahead of or just behind Chris Sale. Um, I was keeping tabs on Zach Wheeler when they traded Beltran to the Giants for Wheeler. Wasn't really too familiar with Matz or Degrom in the farm system, but my father and I went to see a game where Max Scherzer pitched against. I thought it was Scherzer v. Harvey, and then Dickey came out of the bullpen, but I could be wrong about that. Um, but anyway, I kept tabs on Noah Syndergaard from the Dickey deal, and I was watching Dickey when he had that. Let's put it this way: like I didn't have to tune in to see Johan Santana's, no hitter because I was actively watching those games, and I don't think the Mets were any playoff contender that year. And Dickey had thrown back-to-back one hitters around that time as well. I probably missed one of them, the one where they were in Tampa, where Wright muffed he misplayed a ball. They called it a hit. I guess it could have been ruled an error. And I don't think like every single game I watched Dickey pitch, he had a quality start like every single time out there. He had one start against the Yankees where he gave up like 4 runs, but if he had 32, he had 232 innings pitched with 232 strikeouts, an ERA of like 2.4, and a WHIP that was like sub 1. He was he was around. He was contending for the pitcher's triple crown, which is the Cy Young lead. I'm sorry, it's the ERA title, it's the wins and strikeouts, and he was like a 20-game winner, and his stats were similar to Kershaw. Some people were saying that Dickey won the Cy Young because of his story or whatnot. To me, he earned it every time he went out there. It was like potential one hitter, no hitter type thing. They traded him to Toronto for Darno and Syndergaard, and so I kept tabs on the team in 2014 and then 2015. They went to the World Series, and I was sending the Washington Nationals spoons on Twitter after they, got Yoenis Cespedes. So there was the game where my friend Chris and I were watching, and they were talking about trading Wilmer Flores, and I basically said, I didn't want them to trade Wheeler or Flores, and they wound up not doing it. I forget who that deal was for. I don't know if it was Carlos Gomez. Carlos Gomez was traded for Johan Santana in 2008 and to the Twins, and he might have been on the Brewers around that time. So there were a couple guys that the Mets were interested in. They wound up getting Yoenis Cespedes, and this is kind of like my complaint about the Mets, where they had an opportunity to sign Cespedes as a free agent. I liked Edwin Diaz, but they had opportunities to sign free agent, closers like Shelby Milner and Craig Kimbrell. I believe were free agents in the season that they got, Diaz, but they decided to trade the farm for him. So they could have signed Cespedes as a free agent. They wound up, giving up Michael Fulmer and some other prospects to get Cespedes, but it turned out to be, a good deal. I was always wondering why Billy Beane traded Cespedes for John Lester for that one game. Like, um, you trade your best player or something for a rental pitcher. Um, but every spoon represented a game of elimination. So when the Mets won and the Nationals lost, I guess that's a full game elimination. I would send, you know, I would send pictures of spoons representing the number of elimination games, and I was calling that the Mets they're getting due to they're getting Darno back or something, so this lineup's going to be long. I said, with their pitching and their hitting, they're going to make it to the World Series. And I actually purchased World Series tickets, Game 4, anticipating that the World Series would be won in 4 to 5 games, and that's because the Mets had all those starters with like sub-1 whips. So I said, all these guys are capable of going 7 innings with giving up a run or fewer, and all they got to do is, hold it over to the bullpen. Well, it kind of played out that way because I felt that the only pitcher on the Royals that could compete with the Mets was Johnny Cueto, who had also a sub-1 whip, and that one played out kind of as expected. Um, but Familia had like an unprecedented 4 blown saves or something in that World Series, and the game it did go to 5 games, but in favor of the Royals. Um, Somebody made a video of like all the Mets playoff appearances over past I forget how many years. They excluded 2016 where they played a wild card game against the Giants. Um, that was also a game where I believe it was 1-0. Familia gave up a home run. Bumgarner, I like to joke, threw like 40 pitches that game. The Mets were like first pitch swinging every single time they went up. I went to that game. And in 2017, I might have kept tabs on it. There was a period around like 2018 where there was like a change in the guard, where a lot of young talent came up through not just the Mets system, but like all baseball. It seemed like all the names you were familiar with were being replaced, and I really had no idea who the players were. Um, I don't know if this was my move to Colorado, but I did see a baseball game out in Colorado. I went to see the Giants play the Rockies, I guess Carl Yuzemski's kid or something plays for the Giants or something. And then I got a little bit more familiar with the Mets and whatnot and got back into it. But my priority has been my clinical psychology PhD, my counseling psychology graduate program, my health and hospital law studies at Seton Hall School of Law. So other things have taken priority, and I forget what the title of this one is. Something about being reborn, you know, all the letters I've sent and how I would live my life if I was reborn. The last few years, um, the things that have primarily taken up my time have been advocating for myself in the wake of police violence, false imprisonment, and also the incident where I was put into a coma. Um, I've sent letters to newspapers, lawyers, internal affairs. I've contacted Congress people and even the United Nations. And there's only one person that ever got back to me. It was the Attorney General of the state of Colorado. Um, so that takes up a fair amount of my time. And then studying for my graduate studies. And it's something that I enjoy more. So here there's some Diablo stuff. I have Lord of Hatred. I have not played it because I'm currently enrolled in a graduate psychology program, and that takes priority. Um, but that said, like I'm kind of like like I'm like morale is so low because I've completed here's the thing a CREP accredited counseling program is about 20 courses. It's 60 credits. I completed 51 credits, 17 courses at Saybrook. Then I completed 4 more courses at Seton Hall. So I have over 60 credits, over 20 courses. So like I qualify for a nationally certified counselor. I meet the New York State requirements of 60 courses for a licensed mental health counselor, but I don't have the master's diploma associated with it, and I don't know. Perhaps I could just petition the state and say like, can you make me a licensed mental health care counselor? The only thing is like, I do have hours at a mental health facility. Um, but I'm not sure if they would count towards the hours required for this because um, they were done outside of the program. Like, I think X number of hours have to be done while, going for your degree. Um, so I was dismissed from a clinical psychology PhD program. I went into a counseling psychology program, and I was dismissed from that program 9 weeks into my third semester, so I would have been, I would have had more courses completed, and it was for some vague allegation that I currently filed a grievance with the Department of Education, and hopefully that will turn up in my favor. I sent them every single communication I had, every email I sent, every um, text communication, and every message on Canvas, and even a WhatsApp group conversation, and there isn't a single inappropriate comment. No, sexual advances, no inappropriate, you know, comments or whatever. Um, So it's a shame that I had to find another program and apply to that program. And while I can transfer some credits in, there's going to be some redundancies, and there's work that really isn't appealing to me. I chose the program that I was in because I had an interest, I had a familiarity with the school. There were other courses that I was interested in taking at that school. If I found myself in a position where I completed my degree, and after a few years, generating income and doing research, if I wanted to go back and study something, I could. Um, but now I'm in a program where it's a lot of it's a lot of quantitative applied research courses, and I want to do qualitative pure research, and so, but it's just something that I wanted to take so I can get myself back into a PhD program. Um, and that's, like kind of where I'm at right now. Morale is just completely low. Um, at this point, I should have a master's level PhD, so I should have at least a master's diploma. Um, but unfortunately, the sequence at Saybrook, where at 30 credits you can do your master's project, I have 51 credits, but I don't have that master's project completed because it required a course sequence that they should have advised me to take a different sequence. So I enrolled in, my first semester was January 2022. I was originally in developmental psychology and a research course. I asked if I could add a third course, and they put me in histories and systems. Histories and system is not a prerequisite for anything, but theory and personality is. And so the personality course was offered that semester, and that's part of a sequence of um, personality and theory and and psychopathology and diagnosis, and then what's called a clinical intervention. And you need to take those three courses before you can do your master's project. So I had to wait until um, the um, the winter of 2023 to take the personality course. So that meant delaying my psychopathology and diagnosis course to the fall of 2023. And that's when I was anticipating doing my master's project. So if they had advised me to take personality in 2022, I would have taken um, the psychopathology and diagnosis in the fall of 2022, or maybe um, maybe that winter or something, and then I could have taken the clinical intervention, and I would have been doing the master's project in October of 2023, and but that's not how it played out. I asked a professor if I could do a master's project on a clinical test for competence to declare mature minor status. He says that's not a master's project, that's a dissertation. I was reading Sapolsky while in prison, and he basically said something really isn't that feasible. There is something called a Gillick test for competence in the UK, where a 16-year-old can um, demonstrate that they are aware of the risk and benefits of a certain medical procedure, and that will allow them to consent to treatment without a parent being there. Um, so, to declare mature minor status in the United States, you either have to emancipate, get married, have a child, or be pregnant, and so I thought of developing something that would allow, minors, adolescents to declare mature minor status without emancipating, without, causing some sort of discord with their family. There's one that I've been saying that I just want to check up on, which is also entry into the armed services. This wasn't one I fully understood when I was taking my health law course, um, because, I would think that would be something that you have to be 18 to enter the armed services. So, let me just search how young can you be to join. 17 years old with parental consent, 18 years old without. So, solo smash. The Mets are currently up 8-4. They've been doing very well since I watched a Met game. So I was mentioning how I didn't watch many Met games this year. Well, I caught an Angels game when Christian Scott started pitching. I watched, up until about the seventh inning. And then I put on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And the Mets won that game.
An insane mythic seal. I gotta get myself. I don't know. Should it be a karmic drop? Should I just, you know? So how do I want to spend life if reborn? You know, I didn't really. I took a grounded approach to this stream, and I popped open the YouTube here, and I started talking about baseball. Um, but I have been determined to finish what I started here. I want to provide grief counseling. Um, it's dedicated to the memory of my grandfather. Um, and I feel like, you know, like a couple years ago, I was willing to put myself in another 48 credit program to get a master's and complete this thing. Um, but as time has gone on, you know, like at this point, this year, so had I still been in that program, I guess this year I likely would have been completing it. So, because it would have taken a little over 2 years. I don't fully understand this because I think you can finish a CREP accredited program at Northwestern in 18 months. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it would have maybe taken 2 years to finish the program at, you know, Seton Hall. So that would have been happening this year. And had I still been at Saybrook, I would have been doing my dissertation this year. And I think I had ideas for dissertations. I think I have several ideas for dissertations. And, you know, I'm ready to contribute to research. But with the lack of justice in my favor after the harms I experienced at the hands of the police and 911 responders. My morale is waning. Um, my enthusiasm for these things is somewhat dissipating because the more I stew in PTSD and the more these issues go unresolved, the more it takes a toll on my mental well being, where I have concerns for my cognitive clarity, um, my mental acuity. Like I feel in high school had a high mental acuity. I was sharp, and I had this non-judgmental, unconditional, positive regard for others. I had a genuine interest in others. I was empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate, and you know, but I was also someone who was, um, you know, determined to suffice the requirements, the qualifications, the competencies declared by the state for my chosen profession, which at the time was medicine, but similar competencies exist for counseling, and so I wasn't going to, I wasn't going to practice medicine or counseling without those qualifications. So I'm doing the things that are required of me, and but trauma has affected my trust in others, and I had a traumatic brain injury, and I'm concerned for my brain health. That doesn't mean that I can't feel sad or understand sadness or understand happiness or be happy. Um, it just means I have a little bit more difficulty um, like if I was happy for someone else, that emotion would flow through me, and like now potentially it's just hard to be happy for other people when such negative things have happened to me. Perhaps it's um, let's watch.
I'm Gus, and my job is to make you happy. So I recommend Optimum Fiber. It's famously fast and starts at only $25 a month with a 5-year price lock. It's a great deal. I have a real nose.
The Audi Q3. I just want to say hi to Jason. I have really no interest in Reload. It's good to see that he's welcome on these official Metallica things. Bloodlance is back in Diablo 4. Pit 110 in 4 minutes. That is exciting. Nothing excites me more than a necromancer with Bloodlance. Let me tell you why. I call the blood necro the the conductor, because they get the little wand, and it looks, they have their no, but like if you have your minions with you, you have an ensemble, you have a band, and you're a conductor, so you're waving a little baton around, and you're conducting this beautiful music, and that's the conductor. I went back to read one of my papers from Saybrook, and I was disappointed to. I saw the wording. I said, "Gee, this doesn't. I don't recall it. Sometimes I recite this paper, and I remember the wording being different, and it has to do with a Thordis, Elva, and Tom Stranger TED Talk, and I thought basically it read like this: 7,200 seconds. That's when I knew that Thordis's experience was like all the other rapes she had heard about on television. That's basically the gist of how I thought it went. And when I opened it up recently, it read like this. So let me find it. I think it's discussion 4. It goes, there are 7,200 seconds in 2 hours. This is what Thordis says she learned while she was being raped by her boyfriend Tom. For me, it was the part of the TED Talk that I realized this was just like the rape Thordis had seen on TV. It was not consensual. And so I went back to the TED Talk, and let me show you what I'm talking about here. So this is the intro. And it just didn't, especially like this sentence. I thought it just kicked into 7,200 seconds. That's when I realized that this was just like the rape Thordis had heard about on television or seen on television. That's basically how I thought it went. So I went to YouTube and Thordis, Elva, and Tom Stranger, and I went to this, and I went to the transcript. So let's get this playing here. And here it says, I've known that there are 7,200 seconds in 2 hours. So that is the quote. There are 7,200 seconds in 2 hours. And I didn't really read the rest of it, but basically it kind of speaks how survivors of traumatic experiences engage in some sort of philanthropy, some sort of giving back, where they might become mental health counselors. They might engage in advocacy or writing a book or something, psychoeducation type things, and because I was looking for a writing sample to send the Department of Education. And I wanted to basically say, this is the body of work that I did at Saybrook, and this is the body of work that I did at Seton Hall. Now I think my writing has improved. Part of that is just, just citing more. But, nothing I have, there isn't too much that I am overly proud of that I would want to publish. And, that's kind of the whole point. And perhaps that just comes with, research. There was a point where I got one of my professors, this Dr. Sherman, he's a professor of research methodology. he said the best dissertation is a done dissertation. And while I was considering my dissertation opportunity to showcase myself, to add to some sort of generativity, I also saw it as an opportunity to just be a stepping stone so I can get the qualifications to engage in my own research and then produce some generativity. I felt that, Saybrook was potentially just a university where your dissertation is essentially a literary synthesis of previous work. I read some of the past dissertations, and it part of your dissertation is a literary review of past research. But I just kind of saw it as, um, getting people out the door with dissertations, and like I was concerned, like, so I was thinking, like, yeah, I could be on my dissertation this year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I would finish this year if I was aiming to do something where I was, you know, um, interested in establishing myself, using this opportunity for some sort of generativity to showcase my ideas, and rather than, just getting it done. But just getting it done would allow me to engage in research, which could potentially add to generativity to the field and whatnot. And generativity is a word that I've used um, a lot since my time at Seton Hall. It's included in Newman and Newman, and I really wasn't familiar with the word prior to that, even though I used the same Newman and Newman textbook at Saybrook. It wasn't same structure. We didn't just go through the textbook one chapter at a time. So I've kind of changed my approach where the best assignment is a done assignment. Just do it to the suffice the criteria of the rubric, the grading criteria, and just move on, and then get yourself into a position where you can engage in research. I think one of my assignments at Seton Hall School of Law was AI trap bait or something. So I wasn't familiar with ChatGTP until the fall. I'm sorry, the winter of 2023, and I didn't really use it until late mid 2023, maybe like the summer 2023, and I have certainly not used it to generate any papers. I have brainstormed with it, and like sometimes I reject, like when I was taking a counseling theories course, I fed the thing for some details. Said, I'm trying to find something in here. Can you just check it to see? Because I thought I caught this or something. And it comes back with, it made some inferences about the person that weren't explicitly said. So I don't incorporate those ideas into my work. I try not to make inferences about my client. It has to do with the therapeutic alliance, where I don't want to create distance between myself and the client, and having a incorrect inference might, the client might receive that information in such a way where it just creates distance between the therapist and client. it shows a lack of congruence, especially if you're in a humanistic approach and you're preaching unconditional and positive regard, empathy, and congruence. If you are making incorrect inferences, you are creating distance. You are demonstrating a lack of congruence between yourself and your client, the lack of understanding of their motivations. You are not truly seeing the world through their lens because you don't fully understand their motivations, their beliefs, their feelings, and why they might engage in certain behaviors and how they might react to certain experiences. So, um, so while some people say that, ChatGTP, we're going to roll back the software because we feel ChatGTP is too much of a yes man, I disagree. I think, sometimes ChatGTP makes inferences, and I certainly have leniency towards ChatGTP, but sometimes those things um, might demonstrate a lack of understanding on behalf of the AI, and I reject those um, insinuations or whatever. Um, the Mets are piling on. It's 10-4. I kind of lost my train of thought here. Oh, I was mentioning the trap bait. So I was in a course on clinical trials. It's an ethics course at Seton Hall School of Law, and it seems like a fairly simple assignment. What's the difference between the common rule, an American, um, and Article 29 of the European Labor Union? The common rule is 45 CFR 46, and it is regulations for the protection of human subjects in research. That's a lot of broad consent, informed consent, broad consent, protection of vulnerable populations, consent for fetuses, and maintenance of genetic material that might be used in clinical trials. So if you give some sort of data, such as genetic information, for a research trial, how does that, genetic material get maintained? Post-clinical trial, and if they're going to use it for another trial after the one you have participated in, you either have to have given them broad consent up front to do so, or they have to get informed consent again for each trial that they use it for. Um, And then there's the Article 29. In the context of the European Union's common foreign and security policy, Article 29 of the Treaty on European Union allows the Council of the European Union to adopt a decision to impose restrictive measures, often referred to as sanctions, against non-EU countries, non-state entities, or here's what the AI says about Article 29. Article 29 of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, stipulates that data processors and any person acting under the authority of a controller or processor cannot process personal data without direct instructions from the controller unless authorized by EU or member state law. Historically, this term referred to the Article 29 Working Party, an independent EU advisory board body on data protection and privacy established by Directive 95/46/EC, which was replaced by the European Data Protection Board in 2018. So the common rule, let me just go to let me type in how many pages. So the common rule is approximately 25 plus pages. This according to Google AI. And the European one is, like a page. So I thought, this might be like, let me just plug this into AI, and it's just going to tell me what the differences are. Kind of a busy work assignment. I thought I would get Carmela talking in her sleep. Carmela makes the cutest noises when she sleeps. I just want to take this opportunity to tell Carmela how much I love her. I love you a great deal, Carmela. We are so blessed to have you in our lives. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. So I was sleeping on the couch upstairs in my home, and I hadn't even realized that Carmela had joined me on the couch, and she situated herself on the blanket. So midway through the night, I pulled the blanket up, and I guess I disturbed her sleeping. Shelby's up there now. Of course, when I sleep up there, Shelby sleeps in that room. That's her favorite room to sleep in, I think. It's loud down in this room. Like, that room kind of has 9-foot ceilings at its peak. So, of course, one of the reasons why I sleep in this room is the high ceilings gives me some comfort. I saw a spider in the shower yesterday. That was I have arachnophobia, so like, it was high on the ceiling, and it just serves as like a buffer, extra distance between me and any potentially creepy arachnids. Here's What Took You So Long by Armin van Buuren. One thing that has saddened me. First of all, I'm going to do this. This is, so I'm going to go to my account, check for available downloads. There are no downloads available for Kava Digital at iCloud.com. Do they still have videos on iTunes? So this says songs. So what I was thinking, I had purchased the Game of Thrones box set, season 1 through 7, which comes with a digital download, and I'm pretty sure I uploaded it to this iTunes account, which was created in, it might not be. So I created this iTunes account in 2018. I had an iTunes account from about 2004 to 2016. I deleted that account, and that account had hundreds of, had thousands of songs, and about 2,734 songs, I think. That's, I think, how many match with Google Match and iTunes Match. And then there were some songs that my father, I put his stuff on there. But then there was also movies. So I had Rush, I had Suits, I had Sopranos, I had Entourage, I had House, I had Community, I had 30 Rock, I had Weeds, I had The Wire, and but I didn't really have Game of Thrones, because by the time Game of Thrones rolled around, HBO had streaming through HBO Go or HBO Max. So there was really no reason to purchase that, because my parents had subscribed to HBO and I could watch the shows via DirecTV. And but eventually I got the box set for Game of Thrones, and it had a digital download. So I know I have watched some of those digital episodes, but I don't know if it was likely purchased in New York around 2018. I created this iTunes account when I was in Colorado, and I think I purchased that Game of Thrones box set while in New York, and also I think I left the box set at home when I went to Colorado, so I had the digital download with me, but that must have meant it was attached to another iTunes account. It could be, I'm assuming I have an iCloud account, because I did go into Apple and purchase an iPad cash. There was a point there where I was living off the grid, so I purchased a Mac Mini with cash, I purchased an iPad with cash, I purchased an iPhone with cash, and that's why this has an alias email. So this was this Kaba Digital at iCloud.com. That was part of an alias email on I walked into an Apple store in Colorado. I paid for the phone outright. I got an iPhone, paid for the thing in full, and had a new network, and I was trying to reduce my digital footprint for a bit. Now it's like, I have a watch that has LTE, and I want it to be a GPS just in case, someone needs to locate me. So I added the song in April of 2024. So if I migrate to my new iTunes account, it's not going to have that date. But I'm going to have Rob Kovacs here. I can't get rid of Rob Kovacs. I'm going to listen to some music, so the stream is going to end for now.